Hello and welcome to this eCampus News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber and I'm a senior contributing editor here at eCampus News, and I want to welcome everyone to today's presentation, which is sponsored by Blackboard. And over the next hour or so, we're going to discuss UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. And more specifically, we're going to examine how UDL can help you save time and effort in your interactions with learners. But before I hand things over to our speaker for today, I'm just going to take a few moments to highlight a couple of items. First, we are recording the event today, and in a couple of days, we'll send out an email to everyone who registered that contains a link to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any point during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. We'll address some of the questions as they come in, but I also hope we'll have about 15 minutes or so at the end when we can tackle a bunch more. And I would also encourage you to launch the chat function, the group chat function. You can do that by clicking on the blue group chat icon down at the bottom of your screen in that black toolbar. We're going to be using the group chat a lot today. I understand from our speaker that he'll be asking for your feedback on a whole range of issues, and we're going to be using group chat for that. And also, if you have any technical issues during the course of the presentation, you could also use the group chat to contact me through that. And with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. Tom Tobin is the Conference Programming Chair in the Distance Education Professional Development Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as an internationally renowned author and speaker on issues of quality in teaching with technology, including evaluating online teaching, academic integrity, copyright, and accessibility. He holds a PhD in English literature and a second master's degree in information science, a professional management, project management certification, a master online teacher certification, a quality matters reviewer certification, and he recently completed the professional in accessibility core competencies certification. And not surprisingly, he tells his nieces and nephews that he is in the 41st grade. And his most recent books are Evaluating Online Teaching, Implementing Best Practices, and The Copyright Ninja. And Tom's next book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education, will be released on November 1st. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tobin now. Welcome, Tom. It's a real pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I want to say thank you to eCampus News for inviting me, and to Scott Reddy from Blackboard for suggesting this whole series to take place. I also want to thank all of you who are here on the live webinar. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to work with us on a hot topic in our industry here. And also for those of you who are going to be looking at the recorded version of the webinar as well. Thank you for taking part. And let me introduce you folks briefly. We've got a huge support crew behind Andrew. That's Karen, Annette, Camilo, Nancy, and Christopher. So they're going to be taking care of all of you while we work together today, and I'm grateful for their help in doing so. Just a few housekeeping ideas before we get started. This is going to be an interactive webinar, so please make sure that somebody at your location, those of you on the live webinar, make sure you have somebody who's near the keyboard so that you can enter ideas and respond and interact. If you're watching the recording, please make sure that you have a pen and a piece of paper or your laptop handy so that you have some way to pause and take notes so that you can really get some takeaways that you can use tomorrow out of your experience. And the last piece of housekeeping, we do have two different ways to provide feedback. One of them is the Q&A feature, and that's if you have questions or ideas to share. And the one that we're going to be using together is the group chat area. You heard Andrew talk about that blue group chat icon. You might want to click that in your interface so that you can see the group chat that we're having all of us together. Let me start out by saying that although Blackboard is one of the sponsors of this webinar, we're going to be platform agnostic. You don't have to be a client of a particular company in order to get good value out of what we're talking about today. And we're going to show you some examples that transcend different platforms and different tools. I also want to make you three promises today. I saw that we had some folks not only from higher education, but from school districts and even from industry here on the webinar. All of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today will apply to you. So I want to make sure that I'm addressing all of those different audiences. So here are those three promises. We're going to talk about what universal design for learning is. We're actually going to do a little bit of myth busting along the way as well, because UDL, a lot of people think they know about it and they don't quite have it. I also want to share how you can talk to other people about universal design for learning. One of the challenges is we can't get everybody from your school or your college or your university or your company on a webinar like this. So I want to make all of you secret, sneaky evangelists for the framework of universal design for learning. And don't worry, I'll make it easy and make it so that you can talk to your colleagues in an informed way about UDL. And most importantly, I'm going to show you how to get started. What are the concrete things that you can do in the next few days that will move the needle, help your learners and help your customers with access, accessibility, and feeling like they have choices and control and feeling like their voices are heard. Whether you are an instructor, a designer, a facilitator, a librarian, or you're in the learning and design area at your institution. So those are my three promises. What it is, how do you talk to people, and how do you get started? Speaking of getting started, let's start with a story. On your screen, you see some students in a tutoring center, and this is a photograph of Katie. Katie was a student at Northeastern Illinois University, where I worked for many years before I came to the University of Wisconsin. And I know Katie through a little bit of an unorthodox way. One of her professors in the education department came to me and he said, "Tom, I have a student whom I know is cheating in my class, but I can't figure out how." My colleague was teaching a junior level educational methods course. And so I said, well, let's look at the evidence here. Show me what you have. And the professor showed me one of Katie's papers that she had submitted early in the semester. And I looked at it and it had a title and then it kind of rambled. It was a little disjointed. There wasn't a clear main idea. I couldn't really make heads or tails of it. It went off in many different directions. And then my colleague showed me one of Katie's papers that she had just turned in for his educational methods course. Here was a clear thesis. There were subpoints. Each of the points was supported by details and evidence and examples. And I thought, yeah, there's enough to at least raise the question here. So what's the first thing that I did? I called Katie. And I said, Katie, my name is Tom. I work here at the university. I help professors with the teaching of their classes. And your professor has shown me some really good work that you did. Can you tell me how you put it together? You know, if you give the student enough rope, they might just hang themselves. I was just waiting to see what she might respond. Well, Katie told me a very different story. She said that ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to be a teacher. She got decent grades through middle school and high school, and even when she was a freshman in college, she was doing okay. And then suddenly something went terribly, terribly wrong. She found it more difficult and more difficult to pay attention in class, to follow what the professors were asking. Her grades started to slip. She even had one professor, she said, take her aside and put an arm on her shoulder and say, you know what, Katie, maybe teaching isn't right for you. Now you can imagine how that made Katie feel. And she says in desperation, she went to the tutoring center. Now, my colleagues at the tutoring center are awesome people. They help students every single day to get better at what they do and to strengthen the skills that they already have. And they figured out something very quickly, even though they are not psychiatrists or psychologists or diagnosticians. I can't write you a prescription that says, take this medicine or do this thing. But they figured out very quickly that when they said to Katie, here is the professor's assignment, sit down at this computer and just type out how you might start responding to it. Katie couldn't do that. And then when they said, well, oh, okay, Katie, never mind that. Here's a pen and a piece of paper. Write down your ideas about this assignment. Katie found that challenging too. But when they said, okay, forget that. And they just said, okay, Katie, let's talk. Here's what your professor's assignment is. Just tell us how you would respond. Katie could do that. And so some of you are anticipating what I'm about to say. They hooked up Katie with a piece of software called Dragon Naturally Speaking. And that software allowed Katie to have a headset and a microphone and speak out what she wanted to say, and then it would type that out into a Microsoft Word document. So what happened was that Katie, who was on the verge of tears, her work improved so quickly, so well, that her professor thought she was cheating. Now, I never did end up, helping my professor colleague to find out that this was cheating. In fact, I was able to tell him, no, she's not cheating. This was actually a success story. And I felt really good that I was a small part of Katie's story. In fact, if you're curious, Katie was on the verge of being kicked out of our university. She was on academic probation. And I'm happy to say that now 5 years ago, she graduated. And she is now a social studies teacher in the Schaumburg School District outside of Chicago. So I'm really, really excited about this story. So, if you're in the group chat, how does that story make you feel? What's your reaction to a story like Katie's? Take a couple of seconds and just key in a couple of words or maybe a quick sentence into that group chat feature. What about Katie's story? How do you react to that? I see a few folks keying things in. And we've got Linda saying it feels good. We all want to give this type of opportunity. It's excited. It's heartwarming. It makes me know that students can achieve. Ellen says this is what we should all be working toward. Gerald says adaptive technology is an equalizer. Charlie, I wish more faculty would take the time to learn the story with students like Katie. I'm seeing things like fantastic, inspiring. Angie says, I was able to succeed in a similar fashion in graduate school. Don't judge until you know the facts. These are excellent responses. Splendid. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas here. And I have to apologize to everybody on the webinar because Katie's story is exactly what we are working against, something that gets in the way of universal design for learning. See, what happened was our folks in the tutoring center, they made an accommodation for Katie. And we're going to talk about the difference here between accommodation and accessibility. And accommodation is making one change, one time for one person. And in this case, it was really successful, and I was proud to be a part of that story. But making accommodations is terribly resource intensive. And let me show you what I mean by that. On your screen now, you see a number of students in a traditional face-to-face classroom. One of the students is looking directly at the camera, and she has a piece of paper in her hand. And I'd like to do a thought exercise with everybody. Imagine, if you will, that one of your learners comes to you with a piece of paper from your disability services office that says, I need time and a half on my tests, and I need somebody to sit next to me while I take the test in case I have questions so that that person can read the test question aloud to me. What should our colleagues say to such students? And while you're thinking, while you're keying in the answer on this one, if you work in a K-12 or an industry context, in higher education, students are responsible for going and getting their accommodations paperwork themselves. If you're in a K-12 arena, this is your student with an IEP. If you're in an industry setting, these are your workers who want to request accommodations for disabilities or other barriers. So I see Stephen saying, not a problem. Here's how my course is set up to provide this need. Awesome. Here's Laura saying, we can help with that. Remember, the question is, what should our colleagues say to such students? Ellen says, if I were her instructor, I would say, no worries. Jessica says, that's just how things are done here. Yeah, these are excellent responses. And let's give everybody credit. This is what most of us say to our learners who bring us that piece of paper that says, I need some special thing. Now let's flip over to a different and more challenging question. How might our colleagues actually feel? Not you people on the webinar, think about your colleagues. What emotions might come up or what reactions might come up when that student comes with the piece of paper that says, I need time and a half on my tests, or I need to do my assignments in a separate room from everybody else, or whatever it is. How might our colleagues actually feel? And I see some really good one-word answers coming in. It might be awkward. I feel distressed, frustrated, not sure how to implement this. Am I being fair to the other students? Ooh, good one. Feeling frustrated. Where do I go to get help? Okay, I'm a little mad here. I've had colleagues express anger when a student needed accommodations. Annoyed, there's no space. It's difficult to maintain privacy. I'm reading off of the group chat here. Now, oh, here's a good one. Now I have to do more work. I thought I had all of my prep work done. So excellent, excellent responses on this one. And this is actually what gets in the way when we all talk about universal design for learning. Let me do a little bit of a movie quote here, and I've got some audio ready to run.
I got a bad feeling about this.
What you hear is Harrison Ford playing Han Solo in any of the Star Wars movies. I could have put up a screen grab from any one of the Star Wars films in which his character Han Solo appears, because this is the line that appears in every single Star Wars movie that has Han Solo in it. He says this line. And it's no wonder that when students come to us with paperwork to help lower barriers, when they want an accommodation, when they want us to make one change one time for one person, give ourselves credit. We don't often express these negative emotions directly to the students, but they can be there. And so when you and I start talking to our colleagues after this webinar about something called universal design for learning, our colleagues will make an elemental mental mistake. They will confuse it with accessibility, and they will, accessibility requirements, and they'll confuse it with accommodations for people with disabilities in their courses and in their learning experiences. So how do we get around that? I'd like to suggest that we should reframe universal design for learning. And we're going to talk about defining it in just a couple of slides here. But I want to first get your mindset out of the disability access and disability services mindset. Now, I have to be careful when I say stuff like this because I am an advocate for people with disabilities and other barriers to learning. So trust me that when we go along here, I'm going to suggest that if you're talking to your provost, your deans, your president, your building principal, your CEO, your CIO, that when you talk about universal design for learning, don't just talk about it as a way to make accommodations for people with disabilities, but talk about it as a way to make the interactions that happen at your institution more easily accessible, easier to get into, start, and have for people who are on their mobile devices. Think for just a second, what percentage of your students, whether you're in K-12 or you're in higher education, what percent of your workers, if you're in industry, what percentage of them own a smartphone? Most people guess north of 90%, and the statistics hold up on that, especially in higher education. We know that 93% of our students in higher education in the United States and Canada own smartphones. So we've got distance education down. Distance education, we've conquered, being here and teaching there. We do that with distance video We do that with correspondence courses. We do that with online and blended learning. The real barrier we haven't knocked down is the clock. So on your screen, you see an adult learner who's on the bus going from work in one area to campus in another area of town, and maybe he's got a half an hour commute, and he's on his mobile device reading for class. So I'd like you to set aside that disability mindset for a minute and come into this mobile learner mindset with me. I'm going to put a quick question up on the screen, and I'd like to hear your thoughts in that group chat area. What's one strategy that we could adopt where we could supplement or even replace our face-to-face interactions with our learners? So help connect to learners via their mobile devices. Just a quick couple of words. What comes to mind, one strategy that we could adopt? And I see Angie talking about podcasts, Robert saying make text-based versions of things, have a Facebook group, do some videos. We could podcast. There's another vote for that. Flipgrid and Kahoot, excellent, some specific brands there. Upload your course content into your learning management system. Use library guides, instant messaging, Slack. I really like the idea here, visual learning. So instead of just text, give people a visual way to do things. Some other specific tools here, Nearpod, we use Zoom. So lots of people are coming in with technology ideas here, and a lot of them have to do with getting away from having interactions in one way only. And I'm really grateful to see all of those ideas come popping up in the group chat. You notice that those strategies are also, for the most part, mobile friendly. I can get into my learning management system on my phone. I can hold a video chat with my professor on my phone. I can look up content in my library databases from my phone. In fact, most of the interfaces that are in the tools that people have been talking about, like Zoom and Hangouts and Screencast-O-Matic, they are designed to be responsive, meaning they shift their sizes and they shift how they look depending on whether you're looking at them on a PC, on a tablet device, or on a mobile device. So excellent idea. This is cool. And we've got a vote for the librarian, so I'm also a librarian, so I have to give a shout out to my library folks. Awesome deal. So let's talk a little bit about what Universal Design for Learning is. It's UDL. Many of us are familiar with UD, or Universal Design. This is curb cuts. This is doors that are wide enough to allow a wheelchair to go through. And that's been around since the 1960s when Ron Mace talked about Universal Design in the built environment. In the 1990s, some neuroscientists at CAST, C-A-S-T, or the Center for Applied Special Technology in Boston, Massachusetts, those neuroscientists came up with the idea that we can do universal design in learning environments as well. And what they discovered was nobody learns anything, whether you are 6 years old or 60. Nobody learns anything and puts it into long-term memory without 3 different brain networks being activated. Now, they actually went in and did all the chemistry. They talked about the acetylcholine uptake pathways. We won't. We're going to talk about having a why, a what, and a how for learning. And that's what's on your screen. You see some students in a study group at a table, and you see 3 parts to Universal Design for Learning. This is the official definition. So Universal Design for Learning means that we should have multiple ways to keep our learners engaged. And by that, we're talking about the why of learning. We always have to understand, why do I need to learn this? So if a pipe bursts under my kitchen sink, my why of learning is I need to learn how to shut off that water and fix that pipe. But it can be immediate or it can be off in the distance a little bit. The why of learning can be you need to understand this concept so that you can unlock things later on in our course, or that it will set you up as a foundation for more advanced topics or ideas. And giving people multiple ways to stay engaged. This goes beyond just posting a message in the learning management system that says, here's where we are and here's what we're going to be doing. Although signposting like that is a really good idea. This can be as simple as putting a time estimate on the activities that you ask your students to do. For example, if you ask your students to read a journal article from a journal in your academic field, If somebody's at the laundromat and they're on their mobile phone and they're going to wait for their laundry to dry in 40 minutes, if they go into the learning management system or go onto your course website and they see, oh, my professor wants me to read this article. And at the top of the article, it says estimated reading time, 30 minutes. Ooh, I could do that. I have enough time. And that helps with time management and executive function. So learner engagement can be real simple like that. Oh, by the way, how do you figure out how much time to tell your students it will take them? Well, you do it. You take the assignment, you do the reading, and then you give your students 50% more time than it took you. So if it took you 20 minutes to read that article, tell your students 30, and that'll be a good back of the envelope way for them to help with time management. The second part, that was the why of learning. The second part is the what. And this is what we all think about when we think about accessibility. This is multiple ways of representing information. So if we have a piece of text, maybe we do an audio version of that text. If we have a video that we want students to watch, we make sure that there are captions or a text-based transcript for that content. And so that's the what of learning. So we have the why, we have the what, and then we have the how. And this is one that doesn't get a lot of play, but it's really powerful. Multiple ways of giving people choices about their action and their skills. How do they actually demonstrate the skills? So if you have your students writing the traditional 3-page paper for you, see if there's a different way that you could ask them to do that. Maybe they take the selfie camera on their phones and put that to good use. Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a student in this professor's course, and I'm going to pretend to be a news reporter, and I'm going to do exactly the same things that were in that assignment, except I'm going to do it verbally to the camera instead of writing it down. So long as the same objectives are there in your assignment, you can grade that video in the same way that you can grade the stuff that people are writing down. Also, by the way, the asterisk on that last one, the how of learning, if your format is the assignment, don't give your students a choice. In other words, I teach English courses. Could I tell that my students were using APA format? They had nice 1-inch margins and they were, using the correct fonts and spacing in their papers. If they did a video version of it or an audio version? No, of course not. So in that case, I don't offer them choices, multiple ways of demonstrating their skill. But you know that I do when they're drafting. And so I'm trying to find places where students could just turn on the audio recorder on their phone and draft up a paragraph. And it's all about the skill being demonstrated and not the method that's being demonstrated as well. So now that we've got the definition pretty well down, I want you to say to yourself, this is secret knowledge. I don't want any of you to share this with anybody else at your institution. Because when you start talking about neuroscience and you start talking about multiple means of learner engagement and representation and action and choice, your colleagues' eyes can glaze over. What I'd like for you to say to your colleagues is that universal design for learning is really just +1 design. Just +1 thinking. Think about it. If there is a way for you to interact with learners now, and this is not just course instructors, this is the folks in the registrar's office, financial aid, if there's a way that you interact with your students, just make one more way for that to happen. You don't have to cover every single possibility, but just having that one more way for students to interact with the materials, yes, but also with each other, with the instructor or the person who's serving them, and with the wider world. So this is an easy way to start looking at the interactions that we have in order to find those wins, in order to find those places where you're going to get the most impact for the work and changes that you're going to be doing. Let me take a minute here and just say, hold on. There's going to be somebody who will come up to you and say, well, I thought this was just for people with disabilities. Isn't this for the people with the hearing aids and the dark glasses and the white canes and the wheelchairs? And the answer is, remember, all of our students have some connectivity challenges. Many of our learners are adult learners, especially here in higher education, and even our K-12 folks. Our students have jobs. Our college and university students have family responsibilities. They have military deployments. They have lots of barriers to their time. And so if we can give students just 20 minutes more in their day for studying, that can be the difference between I'm struggling and I'm keeping up. Let's take a couple of seconds. I'd like to ask Andrew and our support gang back behind the scenes, are there questions that have bubbled up that we should answer now? Let's take just a real quick break to answer a couple of questions.
Well, Tom, I think you're doing a remarkable job because the audience is remarkably quiet. So if they do have questions, I've just posted something to the group chat that they should just type them into the Q&A panel and hit the submit button. But at this stage, I think you've probably covered the material so well that they're just sitting back and listening. So I'm going to let you get back to us.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody. I also just took a look in the Q&A panel, and I see a few folks are giving your answers to our interactions over there. This is a challenge when we have two different tracks or two different tools. So if you want to respond to the interactions we're having just on a regular basis, that's in the group chat tool. And if you do have particular questions about the content we're talking about or the strategies, use that Q&A, and Andrew and our support team behind the scenes will collect those ideas and questions as well. So here's another way that you can talk to your colleagues about universal design for learning. Now that we know that UDL is not really just for people with disabilities, it's not really just about making accommodations. When I talk about UDL, I don't talk about accessibility all that much anymore. I chop the end of the word off and I talk about access, no matter why. Everybody has some kind of barrier in his or her life, and UDL is all about reducing those barriers by offering people choices and control. Here's a cool thing. When we do offer students even minimal choices and control, just +1, they are more likely to persist in our classes. The students who are there on day 1 are more likely to be there to take the final exam. They're more likely to be retained. The students who take a course from us now will come back next semester or next term and take more courses. And they're more likely to be satisfied with their experience because they feel that they have a connection with their instructors, a connection with the institution, and they feel like they have more control over how they choose to learn. Now, is this a panacea that fixes all problems? Heck no. But +1 design allows us to reach out to students in a way that they perceive as valuable. And that is music to every president and provost and chancellor's ears, because what are they always asking us to do? Help retain the students, help them with persistence, and make sure that they're satisfied with their experience. So awesome deal. And we've got actually a couple of comments here in the group chat. Maureen saying this can also be very helpful to students from different cultures, such as English language learners, those kinds of folks. Ooh, yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about that in a couple of seconds. So excellent to throw those ideas in here as we go along as well. Can I break a presenter's rule and just read something off the screen to you folks? Thank you for indulging me. I was talking to Sam Johnston. She is one of those neuroscientists at CAS. This was a couple of years ago, and she said something that sparked an idea for me. So she said, what you see on your screen, we want a situation that is good for everybody. Part of it is thinking about what has to happen at the level of design that makes accommodation less necessary. Why did we start out our webinar with Katie's story? Because Katie's story is a lot of work that comes up by surprise for us. We don't often know who is going to need accommodations way ahead of time. And so it can be frustrating to think, oh, I had all my prep done, and now here comes this one student who's going to ask for all this work to be done just to help that person have a level playing field. So universal design for learning, here's the hardest thing I have to say to people. It is work. There is effort involved. At the same time, we can make that work small and we can make it manageable so we come back to it every semester or every time we teach the class, and we add a little bit more and do a little bit more. And I'll talk to you about some strategies in just a second here. But this is all about thinking about how do we create the interactions in the first place so that fewer people have to do what Katie did. Fewer people will have to put a hand up and say, treat me differently. And that's where +1 design, that's where universal design comes in real handy. Speaking of handy, what you see on your screen is a hand with all 5 fingers extended. And I'm going to talk to you now about 5 strategies to get started with universal design for learning. You can look, if you're a technology-forward professor, you can look at your course and think, well, you know what, I've already done 83 2-minute videos, and I've got to caption all of those, like by yesterday? And you will see the monumentality of the task ahead of you, and you will suffer from analysis paralysis, and you won't even get started. So here's a way that we can get started. Strategy number 1, start with text. What you see on your screen is a script for, I think it's a really boring television commercial, but we can use the same idea. If you start with a script, if you start with notes, if you start with, dare I say it, your old PowerPoint slides, but if you start with something that is text-based, and then you use that as a script for when you create your audio podcast version of stuff, or you use it as a script for when you are talking to your students on a quick video. The fact that you have that text-based version means you already have your +1. And that's a really powerful thing. In Blackboard, it's really easy to post a text version of something and then put up the video next to it or underneath it, or just say this is an alternative to what you're looking at now. And then students can choose whether they watch it, listen to it, read it, do both. And remember, it's not often disability or permanent barriers that get in the way. It's temporary ones too. You imagine you have a single dad who has to drop his daughter off at school and then has a 45-minute drive to get to work. If dad can take his mobile phone, download a reader application that can read a Word document or a PDF out loud, and then send that to the Bluetooth connection in his car stereo, he's just found more time for study that he didn't have before. Has nothing to do with disability, everything to do with being able to choose access points. So that's strategy number 1, start with text. Strategy 2 is make some alternatives. On your screen, you see a chemistry lab, and the chemist herself is sitting at a computer where she's got the text of a journal article that she has just published up on her screen. There's also 2 more students in the room. One of them is giving us the thumbs up because he knows that the PDF can be accessible. If you can click your mouse on that PDF and actually select letters and words, then that thing can be read by a screen reader or a read out to you app like you can get on your mobile phone. There's another student in the room. He's got a video camera over his shoulder and he's taking video of the professor talking about her journal article. And behind him, there's an image of a still camera because he knows that if we take some still images out of that video and we put them into a word processing document with some text-based information about what's important out of the video, what he's doing is he's reducing the cognitive load on students so they don't have to necessarily watch for video content and try to figure out what's important. And here's the cool thing about UDL. Don't water down your content. UDL is not about making the academic rigor simpler of your subject matter material. It's about reducing the barriers for people to get access to, find, and use the rigorous material that you're providing for them. So giving people alternative formats, giving people a simple outline to start from, giving people alternative ways to get access, that's not dumbing it down. That's just making it easier to get in and then do the hard work in your subject area. And so as we're thinking about this, I'm looking at the Ally tool that Blackboard has. This is a separate piece of software that can run in addition to your learning management system, no matter what that one is. They're working on being able to connect it to lots of different LMS tools. But it will automatically in the background take all your multimedia and make an EPUB, an HTML, an electronic braille, an audio spoken version of it, and allow students to be able to get not only +1, but plus multiple of that. So you can do that manually by using +1 design, or you can find tools out there that can help you to do it. Strategy 1 was start with text. Strategy 2 was make alternatives. Strategy 3 is let them do it their way. This is the part that I said was really powerful, and not a lot of people really apply this. On your screen, you see the traditional 3-page paper along with some audio podcasts and a student who's taken a microphone and a camera, and she's using that selfie camera to do a report. As long as the objectives for your assignments are the same throughout, that +1, give me the 5-page written paper or do a quick video. And if you can grade those the same way, then you're doing good UDL. By the way, if one of your requirements in your math course is that people are using APA format correctly, it's time to take a step back and think, what am I actually grading students on? Now, granted, if you're teaching an introductory math course and it's one of those writing across the curriculum courses, yeah, grade them on their written format. But take a step back with your assignments and your assessments and think, what am I actually grading students on? And grade them just on that. And I see we have a real quick question with a high priority in there as well coming through.
Yeah, Tom, let me go back. You were talking about providing alternatives, and Peter has sent in a question talking about what is the science on retention of hearing information versus reading it. That's part one of his question. Does it depend on the kind of learner? Can you talk a bit about that first?
Yes, and I'd like to do a little bit of myth busting on this one too. Many of the people here on the webinar have heard of the VAK theory of learning styles. That we are visual learners or auditory learners or kinesthetic learners. We actually have 30 years of data from huge studies that show that learning styles don't exist. What I mean by that is they don't exist as fixed characteristics. So it's not like, oh, I prefer to read things and so I can never learn by listening or I can never learn by hands-on or doing. It just means that our learning preferences change from moment to moment depending on what we're looking at, the amount of time we have, and often the circumstances. Remember that single father driving his daughter to work, and then he's got 40 minutes in the car, and the only thing he could do is listen to the journal article he had to read. Now, in terms of how much do we retain from reading something, listening to it, those kinds of things, the questioner is correct that those vary. And they vary not based on hard principles. It's not like everybody retains more by reading it or everybody retains more by listening to it. But what moves the needle is that everybody retains information better if they can get to it, if they can look at it multiple times or experience it multiple times, and they can control how they move through it. And that's where making alternatives is really powerful. Some of your students will read the journal article and then they'll listen to some of the audio later as a study guide. So there's a lot of different ways that this can happen. So I'm really grateful to have that question. And it takes us into strategy number 4, and that is go step by step. So you have to break up your materials and give students an opportunity to digest and do. Now, for many of us, when we learned to drive an automobile, they told us to put our hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Now, if you imagine that the steering wheel is the face of a clock, for those of you under the age of 18, a clock is a round thing with 2 sticks on it that helps you tell time. But put your hands up near the top. And 10 and 2 is also a really good way to remember how to chunk up the interactions that you have with your learners. If you're in the registrar's office, it's really useful to give students information for 10 minutes, right? Show your students how to register for courses or or interact with them and ask them about, talk to them about what they can do, what programs they're studying, and here are all your choices, and then pause for 2 minutes and ask them to take an action. Ask them to actually write down their schedule. If you're in a course teaching environment, give information for 10 minutes and then ask your students to do something for 2 minutes. Here's the neuroscience secret too. It doesn't actually matter whether that 2 minutes is even related to the 10-minute stuff. That 2 minutes is a pause, and the act of pausing is what allows our brains to start encoding things toward long-term memory. So on your screen, you see an example of this. Watch an introductory video, read a case study, that takes about 10 minutes, but then come back and post your response to the case study. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. You don't have to go to exactly 10 minutes or exactly 2 minutes, but that ratio is pretty golden. 10 and 2 is a really good way to chunk up your materials. In your learning management system, you'll notice that a lot of us already do this. You'll see that we have Unit 9, Unit 10, Unit 8, and in each of those units we have objectives, and then we have brain breaks. We have ways that we ask students to pause and do actions that are not graded, but just allow them to take a minute and not try to cram everything in all at once. So strategy 1, start with text. Strategy 2, make alternatives. Strategy 3 was strategy 3 was let them do it their way. Strategy 4, go step by step. And the last one, set content free. What we mean here is set content free from the clock by putting materials and interactions in places where students can get at them no matter where they are by using their mobile devices. And we also mean set content free from format requirements. If you have a specialized piece of software, those of us who teach mathematics courses, we use things like Wolfram Alpha, or we use things like MapleSoft. And if there's a specialized piece of software in your field, if you post an example using that software, that means that your students have to have that software installed on their device to be able to examine that or study with that. Open up a screen recording software and just speak into the microphone and work in your specialized software, and then upload that video onto YouTube or your media repository or somewhere where your students can get at it. And then all they need to have is a media player on the device that they're using. And that is very friendly to people on mobile devices, PCs, and tablet devices as well. And here's a video of me when I was in Budapest, Hungary, talking to my students back home when I was teaching an online course. So I wanted to show them the flavor of where I was, and I also put that up there and captioned it so that they could take a look at the caption track if they were in a resource-poor environment. So I wanted to be +1 about it, and I didn't have to make it a great big deal, but I wanted to make sure that I gave it to them in more than one way. Let me put the 5 different pieces up here on the screen for everybody. Start with text, make alternatives, let them do it their way, go step by step, and set content free. Those are the 5 things. And we're going to end up in just a couple of seconds here, and we want to make sure that we have some time for questions and answers. But I want to say 2 more provocative things, and then I want to give you a free gift. So here's the first provocative thing. Let us not just train faculty members about universal design for learning. If it's all on our teachers' shoulders to talk about inclusive design, that's one of the reasons why in higher education today, only about 10% of courses have any inclusive design features at all. We want to get that number higher, and we want to make sure that we're training our IT people, we're training our people in student services, we're training our people in media services in universal design for learning practices, so that when faculty members go to the media services area and say, hey, I've heard about lecture capture, I want to try it out, their response is, awesome, we will send a student and a camera into your classroom, and we'll help you chunk that up into 5-minute segments, and we'll help you with the captions, because that's just what we do at our institution. So I also have a little bit of a congratulations for everybody here on the webinar, and I'll play some audio here.
No more training you require. Already know you. That's what you need.
And so now that you have Yoda's Blessing from the Star Wars films, Actually, we're going to have a couple more webinars in this series. This is the bare bones basics. We're going to get beyond the basics in our next series, and then we're going to talk about expert level practices as well. So watch for announcements on those. And I see a couple people saying, we also love Star Wars. So thank you very much for those votes for the Star Wars ideas. Here's how I'd like to end, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A as well. On the screen, you're going to see a picture that I took while I was going into the grocery store one chilly November a couple of years ago. And in the group chat, can anybody tell me what's wrong with this photograph? Those of you who are there in the group chat, you see that it's winter time, there's slush on the ground. For those of you who live in warmer climates than we do here in the north, slush is a mixture of squirrel spit, road tar, and snow. And there's something wrong with this picture that I took in the parking lot. And Charlie says, handicap buggy return. Ellen says, really, where do I park? A couple other people are saying that the shopping cart rack, the cart return is in the parking space for people with disabilities. Those of you in the South, the buggy return is there. So what I did was I took this picture and I got on Twitter and I said, dear @name of grocery store, this is @Thomas J. Tobin. I am at your River Forest, Illinois location. And then I turned on the all caps and I put not cool. And then I hit send. Here is the power of social media. Not 5 minutes later, I hadn't even picked up my fruit and oranges yet. My phone buzzes in my pocket. It's a tweet from corporate. Indeed, not cool. We're calling the store manager right now. And I did a little dance there in the aisle. Yes, victory. Everything is cool. I did something good for the world. And indeed, when I came back out, you see what's on your screen now. There's the Disability Services parking spot, and someone is parked there. I even went around to the front, and they had the disability hang tag in their car. But the store employees had just pushed the cart return over into the stripy part of the pavement, so this person couldn't open their door. What's my point? My point is, if we're aiming for perfection, we're never going to start. Aim for progress and not for perfection. UDL is something that you do now, and then you come back to, and you come back to, and you come back to. So I'd like to encourage everybody to aim for progress and not for perfection. Yes, the law says we have to do everything right now, yesterday. And what we do is we do that a step at a time. We move in the right direction. Miguel says baby steps, and I couldn't agree more. Let me give you a free book while we're at it. This is one of the books that started me off on my path. It's by those neuroscientists at CAST called UDL, Theory and Practice. And if you go to the web address that's on your screen, and of course you'll have access to this later on as well, the web address is udltheorypractice.cast.org. Give them your name and your email address. They collect that only to fulfill the terms of the federal grant under which this book was written. And Linda has just posted that into the group chat, so thank you for posting that there where everyone can see it. You'll get the electronic version of this book that has examples of colleges and universities and K-12 practitioners who are actually doing it. And this one really helped me to get started in what I'm doing in terms of universal design for learning. And it's time, let's take 5 minutes here and think about some takeaways. I'd like to ask, do we have some Q&A ideas here? Do you have any last takeaways? What's one thing? And put this over into the Q&A or in the group chat. But what's one thing you're going to take away from our time here today? One thing. And I see Robert has already come in and he says, +1. That's what I'm going to take away. So excellent. A couple of people saying thank you. We're not done yet. Hang on. The important part is coming up. But what's one thing you're going to take away? Paula says, communicate with our students. Yeah, listen to what they're telling us about their needs and how they get access to things. Ellen's saying, how do I speak about this to our staff? We say, let students do it their way. +1, it's a +1 initiative. UDL is access and not accessibility. I see, let them do it their way. Aim for progress, not perfection. Don't use a disability services mindset, at least not first, or at least not alone. And small accommodations, Sam is saying, so it makes, making things small, and there's many choices. Mary's talking about 10 and 2. These are all excellent, excellent takeaways. Let me check with Andrew and see if we have any questions coming through on the Q&A as well.
Yeah, Tom, we do have a few that have come in. The first one is from Marathon. It refers back to that photo you took in the handicapped spot in the shopping cart. And looking at that, Marathon want to know, drawing on that, is UDL always a work in progress?
Absolutely. Universal design for learning is something that is never going to be finished. And in fact, it's a good opportunity for me to say UDL is not a theory. It's not a practice. It's not actually a set of things that you do. It's a framework. It's a way to think about the interactions that we have with our learners and with each other. So universal design for learning, if you're doing flipped classroom or you're doing active learning or you have a particular theoretical way that you structure all of your interactions, you don't have to change it in order to do UDL along with it. UDL goes along with, lays on top of all of the other ways that we think about things. Think about it just as a way, and this is why I chopped the word accessibility down to just access. If we're giving people more ways to get access to those interactions that we have, that's to the good. And you don't have to do it all at once, and the focus is on making change now, go back, see how it worked, and keep focusing on those places where you're actually getting benefit out of the interactions. So excellent question. We've got time for maybe one or two more here as well.
Yeah, why don't we go to Deborah? She wanted to say, if someone says to you, this sounds like differentiation instruction, what's your response to that?
Absolutely. Differentiated instruction is the theory of making sure that we are giving different ways for students to take in information in our classrooms, and that we are customizing our response to students to the extent that we can. And UDL and DI have many of the same kinds of precursors. But differentiated instruction is what happens in the moment when we are actually teaching, when we are actually working with students. It is reactive in many cases, and it allows us to hear our students and then respond to them. UDL is a counterpart to that, but this is what happens before day one, before anybody ever comes into our interactions. This is how we set things up for us to be successful. They can work hand in hand. So excellent question. And we maybe have time for one more.
Yeah, well, let's try and squeeze one in. This one comes from Paula, who's got quite a specific question about, do you have any suggestions for her on how to teach citation to a visually impaired student?
Yes, and this is something that I'd encourage you, take a look in your institutions. Talk to your librarians, talk to your disability services people, because if we're talking about a very specific need for a very specific student, that's an accommodation. That's making one change, one time for one person. And I apologize that I'm not going to answer this question directly on the webinar. I'd love to be in touch with anybody here. Get in touch with me. I'll put my contact information up in a second. But UDL does not mean that we will never have to make accommodations. It just makes it much less likely that we're going to have to do that a lot. But we will still have to make one change, one time for one person as we go along. And if you folks are on social media, if you're on Twitter, let's let our host know that you got something out of this. If you go on to Twitter and you just say, I commit to #UDL, and then put the handle @Blackboard, who's one of our sponsors, and my handle is @ThomasJTobin. I'd love to see your commitment, and that can be a way for us to continue this conversation as well. So I commit to #UDL, use the handle @Blackboard, and my handle is @ThomasJTobin. And just a quick plug, I speak and consult on this and other areas that have to do with quality and distance education. There's my book on UDL that's coming out on November the 1st called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. And I talk about copyright, academic integrity, and evaluating online teaching too. My website is thomasjtobin.com. So thank you very much for listening, for all of your interactions. I see a couple people saying thank you and may the force be with you. So excellent for the Star Wars idea. And I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to close us out. So thank you, everybody. Awesome to work with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. That was really an excellent presentation and a very engaging conversation. I don't think I've ever seen a group chat quite so active. So, before we sign off, I just want to thank Tom again for an excellent presentation. And I also want to thank Blackboard for its support today. And one final reminder, we will be sending out that email to everyone who attended today when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you, and this concludes today's webinar. Goodbye.